The Constitutional Court Justice Chris Jaffna has dismissed the Public Protector's leave to appeal the High Court's decision setting aside her findings that President Cyril Ramaphosa misled Parliament regarding his CR17 elections campaign. Delivering the judgment, Justice Jaffna said Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane acted outside her jurisdiction in her report. Now, for more on this and to get a reaction, I'm joined by Mr. Solly Mapaila, who is the first Deputy Secretary of the South African Communist Party. Mr. Mapaila, good to have you with us. Your reaction on this judgment that was meted out earlier on today.
Surely we welcome the judgment by the Constitutional Court as the apex court of the land. It's very important that we could remind the public. We cautioned the public protector ourselves that she should not allow herself to be used. At the time we used the term that she should not allow herself to be used as the hired gun of the factional groupings inside the movement, so that she overreaches her mandate. And we are vindicated today by the Constitutional Court's judgment that this was outside jurisdiction. Nonetheless, I think it's important that everyone else pursues the processes of the law to their ultimate end so that we get satisfaction. But once the apex court has made a ruling in the country, it's very important that we need to comply with its outcomes.
There is another aspect of this, Mapaila, that is also a key focus, and that is the mechanisms of internal political party funding. Of what influence or do you believe that this particular ruling will have on that, as well as the work moving forward that needs to focus on internal political party funding? Are you with us, Mr. Mapaila?
Quite certainly. I think it will have some impact, but we still have to. Yes, I'm saying we will still have to reach the full outcome of the ruling, but surely it will have an impact on internal party political funding, which of course continues to worry us as the party, because we believe that members of the organizations, those without money, will ultimately not be able to hold particular political positions, because only those with money can have the ability to have a wider networks, to arrange programs and so forth, whereas others will be disadvantaged from doing so. So it's something that from a political point of view within the movement, we need to look into, so that money is not a major role player in determining political outcomes.
One of the things that was discussed here is the fact that there's a very thin line that often exists between private and public interest. If the public protector in this particular instance was not the correct vehicle to ventilate these issues, who do you believe is, and what role can other political parties play in ensuring that there is transparency, not only for internal ANC funding, but actually across the board, across all political parties?
Well, of course, different political organizations need to create mechanisms internally to regulate that space. But I think now we've got the public processes to regulate party political funding. But internal affairs of various political organizations should be left to their own devices. But nonetheless, within our framework, we do have some initial mechanisms. Say, for instance, in the ANC, they've got the Integrity Committee. In the SACP, we've got the Revolutionary Morality Committee that begins to look into that. But those are still not as strong as they should be, as opposed to some examples, for instance, of other countries like China. In the Communist Party, they've got a system where a discipline inspectorate commission is elected at the same time as the central committee, which means it reports directly to Congress. It's not a subservient of the NEC committees, whereas our two formations that I just mentioned, their committees report to already elected bodies. Therefore, if a factional grouping is dominant in the elected body, it can actually subvert the workings of those groupings. But internal party organization can reflect on that and create their own mechanisms. We now have a party political funding in the public space, regulating funding to political parties, which is quite new, and I think all of us will have to adjust to that particular mandate. And I think there's a new landscape emerging in this space of party political funding, both at a public level and also internally within individual political organizations.
The judgment that was meted out today comes at the back of another constitutional court judgment against former President Jacob Zuma. What do you say to those who are saying that the courts are factional?
Well, normally the courts will not rule in everybody's favor. That's why even in legalities, there's different interpretation. What is important is to appreciate the levels of the courts and their judgments, and to use internal mechanisms within the court processes to reach the highest level. And in this case, when we've reached the highest level, I mean, like the Constitutional Court, we have to abide by its rulings, because that maintains the systemic basis of the rule of law, which guarantees all equalities between peoples, so that there's no one who's richer than the other and abuses the law against the poor. So therefore, when the Constitutional Court rules in this way, it assists us, and we think it consolidates our constitutionalism and our democracy, and it can actually affirm much more respect to our constitutional dispensation as a country. So we fully welcome the outcomes of the Constitutional Court in their totality.
Mr. Mapaila, what we're covering as well today as a Newzroom Africa are the events outside the former President Jacob Zuma's home in Nkandla. We have seen over the past few days members of the MKMVA. Today we saw Amabuto coming through, at least a segment of them, as well as supporters of the African National Congress, or at least supporters of the former president, who are clad in ANC regalia. Talk to us about your impressions of this. What does this all mean, and what impact does it have on the African National Congress and the rule of law?
Firstly, it's quite disappointing that people have flocked out in support of former president, who we have called to respect the court processes. In fact, you'll remember that we called him to subject himself to the commission, to appear before the commission. We issued statement to this in this regard, and we also indicated to him that when he was president, he used the same laws. He actually established the commission. That he chose not to use the legal processes available to him in this instance, and actually expressed the will that he will go to jail. It's something that people must just accept, and I think that the ruling has been made quite clearly. This will fade out once the law has taken its course and the Constitutional Court judgment has been implemented. It's quite unfortunate that a person of his caliber, of his contribution to our revolution, who also was once a president of our republic, could actually undermine the law to the extent that he did. We may have differences there and there with the approach, for instance, initially on how his matter was handled, but to respond in this fashion, it's extremely unacceptable, because the entirety of our revolution, called the National Democratic Revolution, at the center of it is the democratization of our society, both of production relations, social relations, gender relations, economic relations. So the democracy is at the center of it. So to accept the outcomes of the democratic institutions established by this democratic revolution actually flies in the face of our movement. And I think that the ANC-NEC meeting over this weekend will have to respond to this thing quite decisively and issue a stern warning to its members to comply with the democratic processes and to respect the democratic dispensation that we've undertaken, that institutions that we've built will have to act in accordance with the rule of law, in accordance with the Constitution. That is the totality of the framework that we all must subject ourselves to. Otherwise, we'll breed chaos in society.
Before I let you go, Mr. Mapaila, our reporter Linda Mnisi was on the ground, and some of the people that he spoke to were saying, why is it that the likes of P.W. Botha got away with atrocities and breaking the law? The likes of de Klerk, they mentioned, and they're saying that the law seems only to be active when black people are involved. What do you say to that type of sentiment that clearly exists in some quarters?
No, they can open cases against PW Botha and FW de Klerk. Nothing stops them from doing so. And I think it's as simple as that. We have also highlighted, for instance, if you remember, some of the cases that were not finalized by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, over 300 cases or 345 cases, if I'm not mistaken, that they need to be taken up and justice be served to the families of those who are affected. But nonetheless, with specific cases, as we have mentioned, those members have the legal right within the framework of the law of our republic to institute criminal cases or whatever form of cases through the law to make sure that justice is served. So it can't just be because an action is taken on a person that openly defies the rule of law, defies our courts, and then we say, why did we let PW Botha get away with murder? We removed him and the Nationalist Party from office. We set up institutions based on legality. When we set up a democratic dispensation, we acknowledge that colonialism and apartheid colonialism impacted so much damage and injustice on our people. But to reverse that, we didn't have to go on a vengeful mode. But with regard to accountability, we set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, for instance. I, for one, personally, I didn't agree with it, but the movement agreed with it. So we followed it. Because, for instance, we had priests judging military outcomes and so forth. So, but nonetheless, the framework is there in law. Individuals can actually take up action against any other individual that they think has committed wrongs, and for them to be tried in a court of law.
Mr. Mapaila, thank you for your time this afternoon.